Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the MailRight Show. We're super excited today. We are at episode number 301. Today's episode, John is going to share with us the power of podcasting. So we're basically going to talk to you about what we do in terms of being a podcast. And I'm going to talk more from the knowledge side, and John's going to talk more from in terms of having a vertical that you have knowledge and having something to want to talk about. John's going to really help. He's going to talk about that as well, but he's also going to talk about producing the show, which he does by himself exclusively. So all the show production is information is going to come from John. So having said that, John, why don't you go ahead, since I've already mentioned your name 3 times in 10 seconds, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself officially to anybody that might be new to the MailRight podcast?
Right, I am the founder of MailRight. We're a website provider aimed at real estate agents. We use the power of WordPress, the biggest website platform, and we produce really nice looking websites that you, the agent, owns. Plus, we've got a host of other elements to WordPress that helps you market online.
Lovely. My name is Robert Newman. Before I tell you about who I am, let's describe for you what the show does. So MailRight actually talks to real estate agents and brokers about helping them with their digital marketing. We focus exclusively or almost exclusively on digital marketing, and we cover wide sections of the real estate space. I am the founder of my own marketing company called Inbound Real Estate Marketing, and I focus on the power of storytelling and SEO to help real estate agents generate leads. But honestly, most of my strategy comes from educating professionals with 5 to 10 years experience or more when they're trying to figure out what to do long term with their real estate strategy. We do systems. Anyway, just check out the website. You won't be disappointed. Having said all that, John and I were talking about what should we talk to you guys about that we haven't really done before. You know what we haven't done? We haven't talked to you about podcasting. And we are podcasting, and a lot of other people are podcasting. It's probably one of the most popular strategies that everybody's getting into. So, John, why did you start? Because this is John's second podcast. He's done hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and he's got not one but 2 businesses he's building up around podcasts. So why don't you, if you would, share with everybody why you decided to podcast in the first place?
Well, because as a child, I've been quite public. I have dyslexia, and one of the things that I kind of self-educated myself. I was a great listener of a British radio station called Radio 4, which is a kind of slightly has plays, interviews, politics, the arts. It's a bit like public broadcasting in America, but being a little bit snobbish here, a bit better. It kind of, I was a big listener to it as a child, and it kind of educated me and helped me with my vocabulary, which obviously I wasn't aware of at the same time. So I've been influenced by radio quite a lot, and podcasting, really, its roots is really based on radio, in my opinion. The style, the vocabulary, the way podcasts are normally done, they are highly influenced by radio, and I from my early childhood was highly influenced by radio, Robert.
And that makes sense because I wasn't probably quite as influenced as you, but I definitely was. Radio was a deep part of my life, and listening to something gives somebody, I believe. So there's a lot of studies have been done on the different type of learners. There's kinesthetic learners, there's people that learn by doing, but there's also auditory learners, and there's people who learn by reading, and there's people who learn by all of those, somewhere in between. But many of us actually have a preferred way of intaking information. And if I had to say anything about podcasting, it's not so much like you're going to go out and find the next best thing ever. What you are going to do is appeal to a certain amount of people that only have time to listen to podcasts, who might prefer an auditory way of digesting information. If you're in California, you absolutely are queuing up content for a couple of hours just to have something to listen to on your drive time. There's certain other states that are very similar. So the podcasting has taken an interesting place in the world where, if you've got interesting information to share with somebody, whether it be entertainment or actual lifestyle information, but there's probably a section of people out there that have a block of time that they'd like to fill with something that is like expert learning category kind of stuff. And if you're producing a podcast, you have a chance to slip yourself into that slot and grab some of their attention. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, and also, unlike the more established media platforms, some of the most successful podcasts have been long form. They've been over an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. We keep hours at around half an hour, because that's the kind of average commute in America. And then we provide bonus content, which I think is a good way of doing it. So if you're really engrossed in an interview that we do, you can listen to some extra, but there are some of the biggest podcasts that get millions of downloads are 2-3 hours long, aren't they? So that's kind of bulked the other more traditional television where, if a news story is more than 2 minutes long, it's seen as too long, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. So here's some interesting information. All right. So guys, I'm regurgitating something that was done by Captivate, which is just a marketing company that produces really cool like statistic-based content. So here's some stuff. Podcasting demographics in the United States. 75% of the US population is familiar with the term podcasting. 50% of all US homes are podcast fans. 55%, that's 155 million of the US population, is listened to a podcast. 37%, 104 million people listen to podcasts at least every month. 24%, 68 million, listen to podcasts weekly. 16 million people in the US are avid podcast fans. 51% of podcast listeners are male, 49% female. The average age of the listeners, 12 to 34, 48%, 35 to 54, 32%, 55 plus, 20%. 63% of podcast listeners are white. 41% of monthly podcast listeners have household incomes of over $75,000. 25% of US podcast listeners have a 4-year college degree. So here's why I just gave you all those statistics. If you're a real estate agent and you are trying to think of an unusual way to promote your business, then podcasts are something that you might want to consider looking at. It is a very good way to communicate lifestyle for a particular community or city. It's very shareable content if you're part of Facebook groups, if you have your own Facebook page, if you're on Instagram, if you're on any of these things and you're trying to figure out interesting content that's going to draw in an audience. That is why I agreed to do the podcast with John in the first place. That was my reason to get into it. I just wanted content to put in my social channels that was unique and felt personal to those channels that people wouldn't find anywhere else. And I decided, when John approached me about being his co-host, I said yes. Even though at the time I wasn't really a firm believer in, I wasn't thinking of podcasting as a way to generate business. And honestly, this podcast has not generated me that much business. But what it has done for me is John has been brilliant about getting just in crazy industry influencers on the show. And then we both get a chance to meet them and basically increase our sphere of influence by becoming familiar with all these other guys. Like we've had, what was it? One of the top WordPress template developers in the world.
Yeah,
on the show.
Brian Gardner, he's a legend in the WordPress community.
Right. And you're a WordPress developer. So that was a big...
I'm just a principal of an agency now, but there we go.
Right. But still, it was a cool person
Mm.
for you to be able to email and have them respond, right?
Exactly. We've had some big shakers and movers in the real estate industry, and I think that's the great point because as a local agent, one of the main things that we're trying to get across to our listeners and viewers is that if you want to be successful as a real estate agent in 2021, you can't be the invisible agent. You got to get out there and market yourself and put yourself in front of a lot of other agents. That is the truth of the matter. If you want a really great career, some people just want to be a part-time agent. But if you really are after building a really successful career in real estate as a real estate agent, you can't be the invisible agent. Now, to do that, one of the main things is to be known by the shakers and movers of your community. Now, if you normally approach the top echelon of your local community and say, I'm a real estate agent, I want to have a coffee with you, probably the answer you're going to get in a lot of cases is, no, I'm too busy, or you're going to get no reply at all. Now, if you approach the same group of people and say, I do a podcast about my local community and I want to interview you, and then we're going to share that on Facebook and on iTunes and YouTube, and you'll be able to get a lot of the people that know you to watch it. A lot of the time, instead of a no or no reply, you're going to get a yes. And that, even though it might be a small audience, if it's a locally focused regional podcast, it's still going to be enormously beneficial for you as an agent. What do you think of that, Robert?
I I I really agree more. So I'm going to recap what I feel like John said. So if you're trying to increase your sphere of influence, if you're new or just maybe a first couple of years into your career, and you're trying to think of something unusual, but a way to increase your influence without necessarily having to knock on the door and say to established agents, will you mentor me? One way to get that introduction without seeming like you're getting the introduction is to do a podcast, because you wouldn't believe the people that say yes to John and I just because we have a podcast. Now, we've done 300 episodes, and over the years, I think we're one of the top real estate marketing focused podcasts that exists on iTunes, but we didn't start there. And we've been growing our audience consistently month over month over time. You'll do the same thing with your podcast, should you have one. It will be something that you grow. In the meantime, though, people don't know that. They don't know what your numbers are. They don't know. So if you come up with a good name and you show a bit of professionalism about the way that you book the show, which John has a huge amount of professionalism. So I'm going to talk about two things in the second half. We're going to go to our break here in just a second, but here's what you can expect in the second half of the show. We're going to give you some ideas about what you can talk about. John is going to cover some of the mechanics, if he would. I haven't talked about this, but some of the mechanics of how he actually physically does things like outreach, the forms that he uses, his thoughts behind them, because I think that he has a great and professional way of approaching people, and I'd like him to explain what that is. And we also have a great deal of success on people just coming to us, I think, and filling out our form. Is that correct, John? You would do more of that than me. All right.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of great stuff for you coming out back after the break, all of it related to having your very own locally focused real estate podcast. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the MailRight podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Today, our topic as it relates to real estate marketing is podcasting. Doing a local podcast, or maybe not a local podcast, maybe a national one. But if you're a local real estate agent and you're trying to drum up either your sphere of influence or maybe some local business, then we're going to suggest that you do a local podcast focused on lifestyle. But Before we get into any of that, that's going to be at the very end of the show. John is going to share with us some of the mechanics of actually running a podcast. And what I mean, John, is I'd like to know your thoughts on how exactly you decide what guests you're going to approach, how you approach them, what do you use in terms of support material? In other words, you've got forms that they fill out, you've got things that you feel like you need to use. So explain how you actually do the mechanics of getting guests onto the show.
Well, it's one of the time-consuming elements, but you got to do it in a fun way, and I tend to do it in batches. But I kind of I just with the moments that I'm switched off, I look at other people's podcasts who they've had on as guests. I also utilize YouTube to and do searches in YouTube, and YouTube suggests people to me, and then I'll watch. Then as I'm doing other stuff, I'm not watching it, but I'm listening and see if they're maybe possibly good guests. If people also, there are podcast agencies that do approach you. As our podcast has got more popular and more numbers, we are approached more often by podcast booking agencies, which is great, but you do have to check the guests out, because I tend to, the people they're suggesting, I put them in YouTube and then see if they've done previous interviews. And then I listen to a couple of those. They do tend to suggest a lot of people that are experts on buying property and flipping property, which I don't mind occasionally that we delve into that particular area, but I don't think it's enormously of interest to our target audience. They are involved in buying property for themselves or for clients and then flipping those properties. So it probably has some interest to our target audience. But like you said at the intro, our main focus, but not entirely, is digital marketing aimed at the real estate professional. That's our niche. And in general, we stick with it, but we do have a broad number of different guests, don't we? Because if we kept talking about digital marketing all the time, I think there's only so much that we can say about it. So I attempt to mix it up a bit. Sometimes I don't think sometimes Robert totally understands where my logic is coming from, but in general, not always, but in general, it's worked out, hasn't it, Robert?
Yeah. I mean, hey, one of those things that so let's talk for a moment about partnerships. So John, I think I'd like to, so you're talking about outreach and you're talking about topicality, and those are great topics. I'm going to talk about co-hosts for a second, because John and I are very opposite in many ways, and same in others. And one of those things that we've now done, I think 160 episodes of this show together.
And we've never physically met, have we?
No, we never physically met. We've only been doing these online shows. And I think that if you wanted to co-host, there's a lot of really cool things about riffing with somebody. And if you're going to we do disagree on topicality. I could talk about real estate marketing all day, every day, and I oftentimes do. And I feel like it's a very big topic. However, it doesn't really make a difference to me as a partner on a podcast, because for me personally, this has got to be inside my schedule, a thing where I just show up and I've got 5 or 10 minutes that I put into my prep for the show. And then I show up as a person that speaks as a subject matter expert on certain topics, most of them focused on real estate marketing. And we've had a great deal of success with us talking to other subject matter experts that focus on deep real estate marketing issues. I connect very deeply with them. But I'm not a WordPress developer. I'm not a generalist in terms of my interests. I don't have a lot of interest in real estate investing. John does. John has actually been involved in some of these industries as a consumer, as a person who has done some of these things. So he carries a lot more expertise inside the subject matter than I do, and oftentimes has some really insightful questions to ask these guests. So when you're talking about your co-hosts, try to make sure that you complement each other in some way or another. If you decide that you're going to do a co-host, husband and wife teams are great. Just make sure that you don't have.
Yeah, and it's a difficult one because we're very different in personalities. We have similarities, like you said. We're both entrepreneurs. We both are not from the kind of traditional background of what is seen as an entrepreneur. We do it to make money, but also lifestyle as well. But other parts of our personality are very different. But I think it has worked very successfully because of those factors.
Correct. I also think that is true as well. And we have occasionally run across very small personality quirks that may, cause a little bit of rockiness every now and again. But I would say it's pretty small. John and I, both being business people, have the understanding that this, business relationships sometimes are not perfect. As a matter of fact, most of them aren't. Just like most marriages have their challenges.
It just depends. I don't think you've done anything, I would have told you and you would have told me. There's nothing that we have done that merits a big discussion. But I don't think we've had a big come to Jesus meeting since we've been doing the show. We've had the odd thing that's turned up, but we never had to have a big meeting on Zoom to have to see if we could sort out a major problem, have we?
No, that's true. That is very, very true.
The factor that I've had to learn, which I made mistakes with my other podcast, which you have benefited from, but you're probably not aware of, is that at the beginning of my other podcast, which I've done over 600 episodes, and I've been doing for almost 7 years. This particular one I've been doing for about 3 years, but 3 or 3.5 years. But the other one I was up to almost 7 years. I used to have co-hosts, and I used to kind of, I wouldn't say bully them, but I would want them to do a lot more in providing guests and ideas and helping me with the content. And it didn't work because fundamentally, if they wanted to do that, they would run their own podcast. The main reason why they're interested, and one of the reasons why you've kept with me, I think you now enjoy it, and you can now see why it was such a good idea. I'll give you your credos that you were prepared to try something new, even though you weren't too sure about either me or doing podcasting in general. But you had the credos and the courage to try something new, which a lot of people don't, is that you've got to accept, why it suits a co-host. And I have another co-host who's part of my other show, and we've become quite close friends, and he does a fair bit of work for me. But it's the same arrangement. He just turns up. He just turns up and helps me. And if for some reason a guest, the other great benefit of having a co-host is that I find it quite hard and I find it quite unnatural to talk to the audience for 30 minutes on my own. I find it better to have a discussion. And the benefits of having a co-host is if a guest doesn't turn up, it's not disastrous, and stuff does happen. And so, like this show, we were supposed to have a guest. She unfortunately, she's had to reschedule, but we're just having an internal show now, and it's not a big deal, is it? That's one of the benefits. But I did try and get the co-host to do a lot more, and it doesn't work because, like I say, if they were wanting to do that, they would run their own show, Robert.
Right. So, what do you say inside the emails that you send out to people? So let's just say you find a YouTube channel, you like what that person has to say, you think you might want to interview the person on one of your 2 podcasts. What do you say to them?
It depends on how big a individual, and we do live in a hierarchical society, and we just have to. I personally find it nauseating in a way, but we are animalistic, and most animal societies are hierarchical, and so is ours. So, to be honest, it really depends on how big a star or a bigger audience or individual I feel they are. And I normally, if I haven't got an email address, I tend to use LinkedIn, and you'd be surprised how many people do reply to a message through LinkedIn. And then the amount of research and time, if you're approaching a bigger individual in the industry that you're outreaching, the more research you do and point out and map out that you have listened to some of their previous interviews, and this is the idea of the interview, and this is what I hope that we could discuss that's a bit different, and this is our audience, and this is how it could benefit you. The more you frame it as beneficial to the person coming on the show, the more chance there is that they're going to agree. Now, if it's on our level where they're trying to build up a book of business and we're helping them promote, I still try and individualize it by showing that I have actually listened to one of their recent podcasts, looked at one of their videos. I know something, that's why I'm asking them. But I spend a bit less time, and it's just the reality. And then we have the people that approach us, which I check them over, and then it's just, I send them a booking link to a Pacific Calendar online calendar system, and we record this at the same time. It's very occasionally that I will move the recording time. To be honest, it has happened occasionally, but they really do have to be like what I call gigerati. They really have to be a really big hitter for me to move it, because then it becomes a bit painful having to move when we record this show. And then they can choose a date. I keep the booking calendars so they can't book any further out than 90 days. Because I found, based on the experience, that if you allow people to book for more than 8 or 9 weeks out, they tend to endlessly reschedule. So that's why. And then if they agree, I get them to fill in a form, which is important because it gives me what things they want to talk about, give us an up-to-date headshot that we can use. And also they give permission, which is proven to be important. They give permission that we have every right to use the show in any way, form that we choose to use it. And so they have as well. We have joint copyright ownership. And that's really, if somebody comes on and they totally refuse to fill in the form, I probably wouldn't let them on the show now, because I have had the odd, and it's only happened very occasionally in all the podcasts that I've done, I've had people try and come after me for copyright infringement. And by getting them to tick that box and agree, they can't do it. Basically, they've done a deal with the devil, basically. And I really haven't got much time for these people that come on and then when it's not convenient, they want to come after you. I think they're the scum of podcasting, really. But it's only happened occasionally, Robert. We're at the 30-minute mark, Rob, so I think we need to wrap it up, and we can discuss this for another 10 minutes. How does that sound, Rob, on
Sure.
the YouTube channel?
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wrap up the podcast part of the show. We're going to produce 10 minutes of extra special bonus content for those of you who are big YouTube fans. We're going to ask that when you consume this content, because it'll be something fascinating, interesting, and awesome, that you then like and comment on the MailRight YouTube channel. Yeah, we're really looking forward to talking to you. And I am thinking that John and I will recap some of our favorite podcasting moments. That's going to be the bonus content.
Yeah, I would like to go into the mechanics of how you know, what equipment and some of the mechanics in the bonus. And I think that in the coming weeks, we'll return to this, because it was amazing how the half hour disappeared, wasn't it, Robert? And I think we need to delve into this. But in the bonus content, shall we look at some of the mechanics? I'll give some advice about what equipment and what processes you need. If I was a real estate agent looking, I think that would be really helpful, which they can watch on the YouTube channel, can't they, Robert?
Yep, absolutely. All right, no further ado. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Once again, you can find John at mail-right.com. You can find Robert Newman at inboundram.com. We appreciate you listening to the show today. Have a great day. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the MailRight Show. We're now doing some bonus content for an episode that we've been discussing on real estate podcasting. John and I somewhat disagreed what we wanted to cover in the special section, but we're going to go with John. He's going to talk to you a little bit for the next few minutes here.
Well, we have a discussion, Robert.
Well, I don't know what equipment that we use.
It's also the pro. I liked your views about it. The number one thing, especially if I was a real estate agent, is I wouldn't do the editing myself. Editing videos and podcasts, I do a little bit of editing on the video, but basically it's just putting an intro to the front of the video and maybe cutting out the odd section, but I don't spend an enormous amount of time on the video. Now, when it comes to the audio, I send that to an audio editor who's based outside of America. He was recommended to me, and he's been working for me now for almost 5 years. I've never met him. He actually lives in Chile, of all places. And he's a professional sound engineer, and he does some podcasting clients. And he's amazing. He's been amazingly part of the team. He's unseen and unsaid, and he wouldn't want me to tell the audience who he was. But he's a great guy. I've never met him, but he's been totally rock solid, reliable. I treat him well. I always pay him on time. I pay him a Christmas bonus. I tell him that he's a part of the team and he's crucial. And he's just been a fabulous member of the unsaid member of the team. Now, I recommend that if you plan to get serious about this as an agent, that you do not do the editing. And there's plenty of people that do editing that you can get on Fiverr and other online freelance platforms. And be fussy, read the reviews, don't choose the cheapest, but it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. Secondly, I would try and produce half-hour podcasts, and I would try and do them in batches, and I would try and record 4 or 5 people on the same day. I know that sounds exhausting, but you just book a day out and you pre-record a month with a spare one, and then you send them to your editor. If I was an agent, that's how I would do it, because otherwise, I know you could just book a morning and do the podcast or hour, but things are going to turn up. The phone, there's going to be urgent clients. Something's going to turn. It's actually going to be more manageable to have like 3 or 4 people, 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and just book the day off and like treat it if you were going to the hospital for the day. And you just have to, you arrange somebody else to deal with any urgent thing that comes up, and you just book it off. How does that sound, Robert?
I think that sounds great. I mean, this is all stuff like the production of the show and things like that are all things that John has handled. The equipment, he's always dug deeper into that. His microphones are better. His cameras are better than mine are. I'm using a $30 or $40 Logitech. I'm using a Blue
Funny
Ice.
enough, that's what I use. But the other thing is this idea that you need really expensive equipment. Now, I did. He's still a friend of mine. It was Crazy Bill. He's and his wife are real estate. They're brokers and also agents. They are clients of MailRight. And Bill, I love him to bits. He's really got a big heart, and he's highly intelligent. He would admit it himself, he has no focus. It's one of the things he likes about real estate. His wife is much more focused than him, but he knows that. The other problem when he was my co-host is he is as what I call a sound nutsy. And it is important to have decent sound. But he took it. He would admit it himself. He's bonkers about sound quality, and he's got over $4,000 worth of sound equipment, or even more. I've got a $90 mic here, a USB mic, and I've used it for the past 7 years, and I think the sound is not up to. It covers almost 90% of your sound quality needs. So I've got a $90 mic, and I've got a $60 USB Logitech webcam here. I do have a much better camera that I use when I'm looking into the camera and I'm speaking direct to the audience, but I do that for YouTube content for my other business.
Mm-hmm.
But for this, I've literally got $120 plus a computer, a laptop, but I've got $120 to $140 of equipment, and that's all you need.
So, and here's the funny thing. So John and I, we have about the same amount invested in what would consider to be podcasting equipment. I've got this headset, which is a $300 headset, but I use it for other aspects of my business. It's a wireless Plantronics, and it's probably one of the nicest, most expensive pieces of gear that I personally buy. Mostly because I in my busy seasons, I'm on the phone 6-10 hours a day. So for me, it's worth the investment. Strangely though, I've invested in a green screen, which came from my brother. My brother's 26 or 27 and had tuned into a couple of the episodes between me and John, and then personally complained to me about my background, like kind of gave me crap about it.
Well,
so
I wasn't going to bring it up because I didn't want to upset you, but you needed to do so. He was right, but you do listen to people, don't you? Make a decision. You don't listen to everything I say, and I'm the same. But I'll always listen to your advice and I have listened and I've done things that you've suggested, haven't I?
Yeah, and so. But here's the thing, the green screen was about $120. So maybe even if you counted the headset, I'm $500-$600 into stuff. But John is correct. I don't think I need to be. I think I could probably be, and I'm pretty sure there's a way to fix your background without having a green screen.
Well, Zoom provides a background system.
There you go. So I did the green screen because I do other types of content as well. And it was starting to bug me.
Now, the other great thing is obviously you could record people using your iPhone. There are You can you either use, on the more modern iPhones, you would have to use Bluetooth and mics. And you can use, there are apps that you can put on your iPhone to record it. That's if you get a lot of people that use that if they're going to somebody's place of work or office to record them. I think it's easier to record them over Zoom. And the great thing is that when I first got into podcasting, you had to use Skype. And there are still quite a few people using Skype. I personally think Zoom is a much easier platform. And I use the kind of professional level of Zoom called Zoom Webinar, because it's got some other features that I use. But in general, you can just use either the free, but that does have a 45-minute session level, or you can pay for the Zoom Pro, which will cost you about $115 a year if you pay it annually. And
Okay.
it's just a great platform to use to interview people on, and the actual sound quality is not bad. So we're talking about maybe $200 to $300 worth of investment. So it's not ridiculous, is it, Robert?
No, it's not. So this is going to have to be it for the day.
Yeah.
John and I have a few more minutes, and I've got a schedule.
Yeah, no, I want a quick chat with Robert for 5 minutes. So
yeah. So
but when we got our next internal show, we'll do episode 2. And I'll go in with some of the other things that people need. But I just think it's just a great way of building your relationships in your local community and being seen as a real resource to other people in your community.
As do I. And I'd like to talk a little bit. I would like to talk about my own amazement and some of the guests that have really titillated me for various reasons, because we've had a lot of really unusual guests, all the way down from, really top flight kind of real estate brokers that give their time back like I do, not because they need to, not because they need to promote themselves, not because they need more business, but because they're trying to be of service to their industry. And that is really incredible to me.
People like chatting. It's a great part of a person's life, their career. I know people do real estate for the money, but after you made a certain amount of money, you got to actually like being a real estate agent. I would imagine if you're doing it for 20, 30 years of the totality of your career. So, normally you like talking about something that you like doing, but most people do, don't they, Robert?
Well, let's leave that for another conversation. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've been Robert Newman. This has been Jonathan Dinwood. We appreciate your patronage. Have a great day.
We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.